Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing a build request. This build comes from a long-time viewer of the channel, Knave Suitlef, who has supported me for a very long time, and actually made this build request a very long time ago, and I'm only just now getting round to it. Unfortunately, this is kind of how my brain works. I do the stuff that is immediately interesting to me, and to be honest, I wish I looked into this sooner, because honestly, this was a really fun build to make, as well as now that I know that this character exists. After doing my research and seeing that they're the exact kind of character that I love, which is a Spellblade, I'm much more interested in this character, especially with the upcoming Marvel Rivals game. Because, speaking of Marvel, we are creating Magik from the Marvel Comics. Magik is a Spellblade type character, as I said, tied to the plane of Limbo, which she draws a lot of her power from, and after studying under the likes of Doctor Strange and all that, has become an incredibly powerful sorceress. Now, the thing is, her being tied to Limbo, which is kind of this hell-like plane, she also has a few demonic abilities and such like that, and even a demonic form that she can transform into. So a lot of people, when they look at this character, including Knave themselves, say that this character is obviously a Pact of the Blade Sorlock. Which is why I haven't built it. So, obviously Sorlock would be the most obvious route to take a character like this, and don't get me wrong, it would work, but I don't think it really captures the playstyle that I would want to get from Magik. Because for me, I kind of took inspiration from not only what I read about Magik in the research for this video, but also her gameplay from Marvel Midnight Suns, which at the moment, at the time of the recording of this video, is the most, blatant, animated example of her power, where I can actually see it moving in real time and get a kind of an understanding of it. And in, those videos of Marvel Midnight Suns, there was a heavy focus on maneuverability around the battlefield, being able to teleport ourselves and move enemies through portals in and out of Limbo, because the way her teleportation works is she actually goes into Limbo and then comes back out of Limbo in a different place. So I kind of wanted to get this idea of not only being able to teleport around the battlefield quite a lot, but also being able to, use other things like Banishment and such like that to be able to banish enemies to the plane of Limbo temporarily. Basically kind of making the use of this connected to an other world idea. And while Sorlock can get us some of that, it doesn't get me everything that I want, especially when I looked at her actual skill set and did a bit of research into her powers. So I've decided to not go with the Sorlock today. I'm gone down a very different route. Still getting everything that I think Magik would have, but not in the way that most people would think. However, the way I've gone about it, I think lies up, kind of works quite well with her backstory anyway, about how she actually studied magic under Doctor Strange, and you will have to study magic as you play throughout this character. Because again, this is in character inspired by magic. It is not meant to be magic herself, in which case I would be playing a level 40 character. So I've decided to create a character who is kind of starting out, but is kind of following the same route and is getting powers inspired by that character. And as such, I think the way you play this build throughout the game, having a fun little side quest attached to it if you want to get everything that I'm showing off here, is actually going to be a really fun way to do it. And again, it's different. It's not a Sorlock, which I've done a ton of, and it's actually kind of a combination that I've not really tried before. And don't worry, we still get all of the stuff that Magik would have, at least in my opinion. Maybe some things that have been missed here or there, but could absolutely be acquired through play if you wanted to kind of switch some things up, take a certain feat here or there. But without further ado, let's get into the build. So we're going to be kicking things off as a bard. Will you click off the video? Yes, I know it's another bard video, but trust me, it makes sense when we get to it. Bard is going to get us a lot of the things that I want for this build, namely a couple of spells that we cannot get anywhere else that I think are perfect for Magik and are going to help our playstyle. It's also going to allow us to be a full martial fighter, while also getting access to the full amount of spell slots that we're going to want for this build, that being all the way to level 6. Plus, by starting off as a bard, we're going to get access to the weapon and armor proficiencies that I want at the start, and then when we choose our subclass later, we're going to get the armor, the full armor proficiency that I absolutely want. We're also going to gain access to a ton of skill proficiencies and expertise as well later on. So you're going to be a really good face of the party. Still charismatic, still getting that charisma-based casting that our Sorlock absolutely loves. But obviously, we're not playing a Sorlock here, we're playing something else. As a bard, we're going to be able to get quite a few things at level 1, in addition to everything I just described. We're going to get a couple of cantrips. Now, it's up to you what you want to pick here. It really doesn't matter in the long run, because they're not really the cantrips that we're going to be focusing on for the most part, so choose whatever you like. I mean, Vicious Mockery is pretty standard for Bard, so that's also pretty good, but if you feel like that's not really in line with what you want to play, then feel free to grab like things like Mage Hand, Friends, whatever you like. Doesn't really matter too much. I'm going to grab Mage Hand because I think it is quite helpful, and it can kind of play into that kind of like maneuvering things around the battlefield thing if you want to have the Mage Hand pick up and throw stuff, so I think it could work out quite nicely. As for spells at level 1, we're going to be getting the opportunity to pick up a lot of utility stuff in a minute, so feel free to just grab kind of the more important and useful stuff. And as a reminder, you probably will be maneuvering some spells here and around as you level up, replacing older ones and getting new ones, because we are going to want to fill up as much of our spell list as we can. Otherwise, we are just going to pick up kind of the standard picks here. I do want Thunderwave for this build, because again, it's a little bit of maneuverability, it's kind of like forced movement for enemies, because we're going to be able to push our enemies away from us while dealing a bit of thunder damage. And again, I want this build to have a focus on moving enemies kind of around the battlefield as well as ourselves, so Thunderwave is going to help with that. We're also going to gain access to Speak with Animals, which is just great anyway. I do also want Heroism for this build because I just think it makes sense. And your final spell could be whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. Like I say, we're going to get the opportunity to pick up the utility stuff in a minute. So I would say something like Dissonant Whispers, Fairy Fire, anything you like really. For your starting instrument, pick what you like. We'll be unequipping it pretty much right away anyway. Okay. Just play the instrument audio. Perfect. Next up for our ability scores. This one's going to get a bit weird. For our charisma, we're going to be starting with 16. For our intelligence, we're also going to be starting with a 16, so this is going to be a charisma intelligence build. We're going to leave dexterity at 8 because unfortunately to kind of get this build the way I wanted it, we are going to be using the gloves of dexterity here, but it's perfectly fine because there's not really much else I would have put in that slot anyways, so it just helps the build overall with its stat distribution. Constitution as a result is going to go up to 14, which is going to be nice for us, and we'll pump wisdom up to a 12. We don't need strength at all at this build, so we're just going to leave it with these stats that you see here. For our skill proficiencies, choose whatever you like. I did go with a human for this build, so I do get an extra skill proficiency from there, but feel free to choose whatever you like instead. If you're going with a like a different race, you can go with Tiefling if you like, but this will work with any race, but this will just give us an extra skill proficiency here. I've gone for the Sage background because, again, studying magic just kind of makes sense, giving us Arcana and History, and because we actually have high intelligence with this build, these ability scores are going to be pretty high. So we can also go for things like Deception, Intimidation, Performance, and Persuasion to get that full Charisma kit right off the bat. If you feel like Performance is not going to be that useful for you, feel free to change this out to something else instead. You've got Stealth, Sleight of Hand, which will work with our Gloves of Dexterity. Acrobatics as well could also work. Nature, Religion, Investigation, whatever you pick. But I like Performance because we're playing a bard, so that's what I'm going to grab. At level 2, we're going to be taking a multi-class dip straight away. Now, you can take these levels at any point that you like in the build. It's not a huge deal, but I do want this stuff to come online pretty early, at least for my playthrough of the game, so we're going to be grabbing it now. I want to go for Wizard, if you probably didn't see that coming already with the intelligence score. Wizard is going to give us access to a ton of things, but namely spell, scroll, learning. So we're going to be learning quite a lot of our important spells by finding scrolls throughout the game. Now, these spells are only really important if you're trying to stick to this kind of like portal inspired playstyle that I'm kind of going for here, but otherwise we are going to get access to just great utility options from this multi-class dip anyways. And again, having that side quest of like finding scrolls throughout the game, I know it's not something that everyone will like, but I do think it'll be a really fun time, and in my experience, you're pretty much gonna get all the scrolls you need anyway as you just play throughout the game normally. So if you're not trying to just rush through the game like immediately and you actually want to take your time and play through the game like and experience everything, then you're more than likely gonna find all of the scrolls that you need regardless. So if you're not too happy with that playstyle, then that's absolutely fine. I would say just play the Sawlock build at that point, but if you want to stick with me and see where I go with this, because again, by the time we get to the end of this build, you're going to see exactly why I went with the options that I did, then I think Wizard is going to be a good choice for us. So let's get into what level 1 of Wizard is going to give us. 3 cantrips, and since we actually have points put into intelligence, we can pick whatever we like and it's still going to work. Ignore these two, these are mods that let me make videos. First up, Firebolt. Again, kind of replacing Eldritch Blast in this build, because spoiler alert, unless you want to take Spell Sniper, you're not getting Eldritch Blast here. So Firebolt is going to be a substitute. It's a kind of demonic fiery spell, I guess in this case, basically being able to do up to 3d10 of damage by the time the build is done, and it's a pretty solid spell overall that can be buffed up with equipment if you so choose to put it on par, at least in my opinion, with Eldritch Blast in some regard. So I think Firebolt is going to be a nice bread and butter cantrip for us here. I'm also going to grab Friends as well, just because we didn't pick it up earlier, and since we are going to be getting up close and personal with our foes most of the time, we are going to also pick up Shocking Grasp for a melee cantrip. Next up for our spells, as I said, we are going to be picking utility options here. Obviously Shield being one of the most important ones, and one of Magik's abilities is actually to create a shield around herself, so it actually makes sense to pick this up here, lore-wise as well, but otherwise Shield is an amazing spell that this build absolutely loves. Next up, Magic Missile. Magic! It's a magic missile. Yeah, okay, you get the point. But one of her actual main abilities is to be able to fire blasts of energy, which is again another point for the Sorelock because you get Eldritch Blast, so that kind of works. But Magic Missile is also going to pretty much do the same thing and be guaranteed to always hit, as well as dealing a lot of damage, and combining it with the equipment that we'll be using for this build is going to be able to do a lot for us. So Magic Missile is going to be one of our bread and butter damage options, with Shield being one of our defensive options. And then the rest of it is pretty much just going to be utility spells. We don't need Mage Armor because we are wearing light armor with this build, so this is where you pick up your utility options, like so. Like Disguise Self maybe as well, who knows. And now at this point you are going to see the spells that I picked from Scrolls, but we are going to get into that later. So we're just going to go with whatever's going on here for now. And next up, we have our subclass from level 2 of Wizard. Level 2 of Wizard is technically optional, but I do think with the intelligence modifier that we're going to be ending off on, as well as being able to get a subclass ability and having that extra level allows us to prepare more spells, I do think it's worth it. So, what subclass works for Magic? Well, Evocation would obviously work if you just want to spam Evocation spells, but again, not really what this build is about. Divination has a place here as well. I mean, it's got a powerful ability in the form of Portent, and she does have some time travel based abilities, so it could be justified. However, I think Abjuration is what I want to go for here. Abjuration is going to be great for our kind of melee based Spellblade character, which means that because of Arcane Ward, which is going to protect us from harm. Whenever we cast Abjuration spells, we're going to be able to increase our Arcane Ward charges, and by doing so, we're going to reduce the amount of damage we take from attacks. So as long as we keep casting Abjuration spells, we're going to get a bit more tanking utility, which for someone who's taken a few levels in Wizard and is mostly going to be a full spellcaster, this is actually quite useful for us. And funnily enough, a lot of the important spells that we're going to be getting throughout this build are actually going to be Abjuration, so it just fits with the playstyle quite nicely, and I just quite like it overall anyway. I think it's a fun playstyle to use. Unfortunately, we're obviously not going to be going any higher in Wizard than 2 levels, so we're not going to be getting the fun, like, protect our allies with our Arcane Ward side of the coin there, but I do think even at just level 2, this ability is going to do enough for us, especially with all the other defensive stuff that we're going to be stacking on top of here, because Shield is also an Abjuration spell. So by making attacks miss us with Shield, we're also fueling our Arcane Ward so that when they do hit us, we take less damage. See, this build's got a little bit of tanking to it. Not a lot, because we're still dealing with a bit of a lower hit die, but it is pretty cool in that regard. Next up, spells. For our spells, we do get to pick a couple of more here. Just choose whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. I always like a bit of Chromatic Orb, which is going to give us like a fireball attack that we can change into other elements as well. And also Find Familiar, because who doesn't want a pet? Like, come on. We'll come back to that in a minute. That is our 2 levels of Wizard out the way, so we're going to be going back to Bard, and we're going to be staying here for a while. Level 2 of Bard is going to give us Jack of all trades, making us just better at everything, as well as Song of Rest giving us a 3rd short rest. This is just an extremely valuable ability that I personally never like to leave home without. We're also going to gain access to our spells, and we do get another spell at this level, and again, it's a pick your favourite type of situation, just choose whatever strikes your fancy. Let's just grab a Cure Wounds, because why not? At level 3, you are going to get to choose your subclass, and there's arguments for all 3 subclasses here. College of Law is going to give you more spellcasting at level 6, which will let you choose spells that would be important for this build a bit earlier on, in addition to the magical secrets you'd be getting at level 10. It's also going to give you an ability to use your Cunning Words in order to use your Bardic Inspiration die to debuff enemies, so if you want to go for more of a spellcasty variant of this build, College of Law would actually be really good. You're also going to get more skill proficiencies and expertise as well. which you could select from here. So if you want to go down that route, it would actually be a very cool way to do it if you care less about the sword stuff and you just want to go pure magic. Otherwise, you can go with College of Valor, which is going to give you all of these spell sword stuff that you kind of want. You'll eventually get extra attack, and you're also going to get armor proficiencies and all that. So if you wanted to go down that route, you could also do that. It would also give you a buff to Bardic Inspiration, but allows your allies to add that bonus to their weapon damage or armor class in addition to the usual stuff. So College of Valor absolutely has a place here. Oh yeah, of course we're going with College of Swords. I'm sorry, okay, it's just, it worked too well for this playstyle that we're going for. College of Swords is going to allow you to choose a fighting style. Now, I would recommend dueling here. We're not going to go for 2-weapon fighting, and so dueling can work, especially if you do decide you want to use a shield with this build, which you absolutely can if you want. Also, we do have an option to use a rapier with this build, which is a one-handed weapon anyway, so dueling is just going to probably be the best thing for us regardless. We are going to get to choose another spell at this level as well, and we are going to gain access to level 2 spells. The first level 2 spell I want to pick up is Hold Person, because one of Magik's explicitly stated powers that she's used before is the ability to restrain her enemies. So Hold Person and the Hold Monster are going to be extremely important here, thematically at least. I do have a list of spells so that I don't forget to pick any of them up. I'm making sure I get them all. And like I say, Hold Person and eventually Hold Monster are going to be the spells that we want for this build. We also do get to choose 2 skill expertise at this point. It's up to you, choose whatever you like. I quite like getting Persuasion and Arcana here for this build, at least from the kind of being accurate to the inspiration kind of angle. Next up, at level 4, we're going to gain access to another cantrip, a spell, and a feat. Well, this is total level 6, but you get the point. As for your cantrip, choose whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. As for your spell, there's nothing else here I would say from the Bard spell list that I would absolutely want to grab for this build, so it's going to be another pick your favourite type of situation. In which case, I don't know, there's quite a few here that I would like. Shatter, since we already picked up Thunderwave, if you want to stick on the Thunder theme. Knock if you want to open locks, Invisibility if you want to say, like, instead of turning invisible, you're temporarily going into limbo or something like that. It's entirely up to you to kind of choose what you like here. Cloud of Daggers is kind of another summoned sword attack. You could kind of justify that as such. Enhanced ability and detect thoughts can always be good. Silence is always good for shutting down opposing spellcasters. Just pick whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. One of my favourite spells that I like to go for at the moment is Blindness, because Blindness is a non-concentration option that allows you to blind a creature, meaning that all of your attack rolls against them will have advantage and they will attack with disadvantage. And since it's a non-concentration option, you can concentrate on other powerful spells and still have this debuff up. So in my opinion, it's one of the more powerful spells that you can take when you get a hold of it. It does require a Constitution saving throw though, and a lot of the higher level enemies will have good Constitution saving throws, but in the early to mid game it definitely pulls its weight. But feel free to change that up as you see fit. We also get to choose a feat at this level. Now, obviously there's a few feats that probably would immediately come to mind, things like Warcaster or whatever, but unfortunately just due to the nature of this build, I do want to focus mainly on ability score improvements here. Again, with things like the Mirror of Loss, Ethel's Hair and such like that. If you really want to play around with the stats, there's ways that this could be optimized further, maybe putting a 17 into one of our starting main stats, using Ethel's Hair there, and bumping down Wisdom a little bit or something like that, and then just going for maybe like a feat later on. But otherwise, I'm just going to play with ability score improvements, but if people want to optimize and change things up, even grabbing the Mirror of Loss later on, you absolutely can. But for now, since we're focusing mainly on our Bard stuff, we're going to put some points into Charisma. And don't worry, even with our lower Wizard spell save DC, we obviously will be getting Arcane Acuity to bump that up, because let's be honest, it's one of the best things for spell sword builds. Next up at Bard level 5, we're going to gain access to Font of Inspiration, meaning our Bardic Inspiration now recovers on a short rest as well as a long rest, great, and our Bardic Inspiration is going to get bumped up to a D8, that's more damage on our Sword Flourishes, which I forgot to mention earlier, but yes, we do get the Sword Flourishes to increase our AC, attack multiple enemies at once, and push them away from us. Again, more battlefield movement control, which Mobile Flourish is going to help us with, and increasing our AC through Defensive Flourish is going to make us great in melee combat as well as magic combat, I guess, ranged combat. So basically, Swords Bard is the best pick for this build, in my opinion, but you can change it up. Next up, we now have access to level 3 spells. There's not really anything here that I would immediately say is apparent. Again, my research was a little bit limited, so people who are more familiar with the character may be able to be able to suggest other spells that I didn't select here. One thing I do like for this build though is Glyph of Warding. Glyph of Warding lets you set a trap on the floor that can explode with many different effects. Detonation can push people away, again, more forced movement, as well as being able to create a fire variant which just does fire damage, and it creates this arcane rune sigil thing on the floor, which feels very Marvel spellcaster-esque, because they do use a lot of runes and sigils in that, so I think it works out quite nicely. Also, another non-concentration option, so it's another thing you can just kind of set up and forget, a bit like Blind, and it's still going to be useful. You can even just cast it like a fireball, just placing the glyph right where enemies are already standing, and it will immediately explode, so don't feel like you have to cajole enemies to walk on a specific path, but you can absolutely block off choke points like doors and such with this, and it just works like a dream. So I can't recommend Glyph of Warding enough. Next up, a Bard level 6, total level 8, which is going to feel a bit late compared to usual, but we are going to be getting extra attack with this build, making us a full martial fighter. We're also getting access to another level 3 spell. Again, it's a pick your favourite situation, so just grab whatever works for you. But now at Bard level 7, we're going to gain access to level 4 spells, meaning that now we're going to get to pick some options that really do work for this build, namely Dimension Door, a literal portal that allows us to teleport ourselves and one adjacent ally that we can see with us. Basically a Misty Step, but it's a group thing. And I think this works out really, really nicely for us. I love Dimension Door as a spell in this game, and it just fits the vibe perfectly, so I had to pick it up. We're also going to gain access to the ability to replace a spell at this level. And I feel like maybe a lower level spell like Cure Wounds that maybe we haven't been using so much could be changed out for something like Freedom of Movement, which is going to snap you or an ally out of stun, difficult terrain can no longer slow us down, and you cannot be magically paralyzed or restrained. As well as if you do get restrained by non-magical means, you can spend just a little bit of movement to free yourself automatically. You cast this at the start of a long rest, and you just get to keep it. Overall, an amazing buffing spell. Next up, we do get to choose another level 4 spell, and I'm going to go with Greater Invisibility. Again, it kind of plays into that idea of temporarily stepping into another plane. While we don't exactly have stealth proficiency or expertise here, but you can absolutely get that with this build if you so desire, dropping the performance perhaps. Instead, you can basically just run around getting advantage on all of your hits and having disadvantage on attacks against you. It's going to be really, really fun to use, so you can pick that up as kind of like a fun option. We also do gain another feat at this level, and since up until now we have been learning wizard spells throughout our playthrough, thanks to scrolls, I would definitely bump up your intelligence at this point to increase your spell save DC with those spells, and to give yourself the ability to prepare more spells as well, because at this point, you're definitely in Act 3, you're going to get a lot of those big important scrolls that you're going to want to have. Next up at Bard level 9, we're going to gain access to level 5 spells, which means we're going to get access to Hold Monster. Again, getting that restraint ability that Magik has. Now we have one of the most powerful spells in the game. Hold Monster is a little bit misleading. It basically just means hold anything. It's just not limited to humanoids like Hold Person is. So this thing can hold things like Steel Watchers, which are like constructs and such like that. It's an extremely versatile spell that I absolutely recommend for this build. Now, at the final level of this build, we are going to be hitting level 10 of Bard, which means we're going to be getting what I would consider the kind of ultimate final thing for this build, our ultimate move, so to speak, and boy does level 10 of Bard give us a lot of stuff. We're going to get a cantrip, first up, pick whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. We also do get to pick another level 5 or below spell. It's entirely up to you really what you want to choose here. Any of these will work. I just like Dominate Person, so I'll pick that. We also get Magical Secrets, which is going to give us access to a spell which we cannot get anywhere else in the game at this point. Banishing Smite, a Abjuration spell that does 5d10 force damage and can banish your target to another plane of existence, and it uses either your melee or ranged attack to do so. It's literally a big final slash with the Soul Sword, banishing enemies to limbo on hit and dealing a massive amount of magic damage on top of the regular attack. It also triggers extra attack, so you can do this and then a Blade Flourish afterwards. What else is there to love? What else isn't there to love? Like, it's just the perfect spell for this build to end the build off getting this, like, big ultimate attack. It just makes so much sense for this character. It does cost an action in the bonus action like other Smite spells, but still, I'll bloody take that in a heartbeat. We also do get to pick another spell here. As you can see, we have a few spells highlighted here. These are the spells I will be selecting from scrolls, but as you can see at this point, you can pick pretty much any of them. You could even grab Eldritch Blast if you really feel like you're missing it on this build, but otherwise I would just pick something else that we can't really get anywhere else on this build, and that is Counterspell. Counterspell, I know we're getting it at the final level of the build, but hey, it's still nice to have, and I think it can work nice for kind of like a Sorceress Supreme like we have here. Otherwise, like I say, you could just dump the wizard levels entirely and get this at level 10, but obviously we do want the wizard levels to pick up all of this stuff that, again, I'll be getting into a bit later. And in addition to all of this, we get 2 more skill expertise. I'm going to go with Intimidation and History. Plus 12 for those. That's pretty good. And for some reason, the camera's gone through the wall. There we go. I think that looks a bit more like Magik as well. But anyways, that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a ton of versatility. You're going to be able to get... You're basically going to have melee capability, high magic capability, you're going to have a bevy of different ways of maneuvering yourself and your enemies around the battlefield, moving your allies around the battlefield, and just have a ton of battlefield control on top of it with the hold person and monster spells, greater invisibility, Banishing Smite just to do those massive attacks that just feel so great to use, and you also get all the fun utility spells that come from having, you know, full casters like Wizard and Bard. And again, having the melee spellsword capability on top of all that is extremely fun. That sound effect is going to get annoying. I'm just going to change my sound settings real quick. Sorry for the scuff. This is just how I roll at this point. So let's get into the equipment, because again, the equipment is what really makes this build. But actually, before we get into the equipment, let's talk about the scrolls that you're going to want to pick up as a wizard. So obviously with our prepared wizard spells, we're going to want to keep Shield and Magic Missile pretty much on our person at all times. So at 18 intelligence, which again could be bumped up more with something like the Mirror of Loss if you know what you're doing, or the Disgusting Hair, or whatever, we're going to have about 4 more spell slots to play with. This is what I would select. Misty Step is an obvious choice here. It's literal teleportation, it's the most accessible version of teleportation, and the scroll is extremely common, even in the early game, so you're going to pick this one up quite quickly. The next thing I would recommend is Blink. Again, literally going to another dimension and teleporting back in. It's straight up Magic's ability, but you might not actually need this from the Wizard Scroll here, because I do have a way of getting it through a piece of equipment once per long rest, so you might feel like you don't really need it here, so feel free to not take this here and save that slot for something else if you so desire. Magik does also have time travel abilities, and with my Twins Lost in Time build, I flavoured time travel abilities as being able to use Haste and Slow, so I've gathered both of those here. But of course, the other spell that I would absolutely want to have for this build is Banishment. Literally just pointing your finger at an anime. You know what? Fuck it. Your favorite anime is going to limbo. It's gone. It's bye. It's done. The fandom is in shambles. Your anime is gone. Your favorite anime sucks. Watch, I don't know, obscure, weirdly named Japanese anime here. There you go. Perfect. Anyways, sorry. Banishment is going to allow us to temporarily banish a target to another plane of existence. Again, you'll get... This works the same way as Banishing Smite, except it's a level 4 spell, and you don't need to hit an enemy with the weapon to do it. And you'll obviously get this before Banishing Smite, most likely, so again, it kind of is just like another way of making... I can't speak today. It's another way of kind of meeting the theme that we're going for here. Another spell that I would recommend that you can only get from Wizard is Curriculum of Strategy, Artistry of War. This is a unique scroll that you can pick up in the 3rd act of the game. It's basically upgraded Magic Missile, doing a ton more damage, so it feels like a nice upgrade to the base Magic Missile, and it feels more unique to the character in that regard. Then finally, I'll just go over the other spell options that I have here. Gust of Wind will allow you to push enemies away and potentially knock them off balance. Again, more forced enemy movement. Magik does have the ability to summon creatures from Limbo, so we've got Conjure Minor Elemental and Conjure Elemental here as options. And finally, another ability of hers is to summon, is to make a big force field or something like that. So we've got Globe of Invulnerability as well. Also, Arcane Gate would obviously make sense, but I forgot to get it. But yeah, Arcane Gate would obviously make a lot of sense, so maybe pick that one up too. So yeah, basically, These are the kind of spells that I would definitely recommend, and there are some extra ones here that you can throw in for fun and or for flavour. Obviously, there's other ways to get haste as well, like the 2 bows that grant it, the Darkfire short bow or the Celestial bow. So feel free to change that up as well. But yeah, these are definitely kind of the core spells that I think make sense to get, and like I say, most of these are really easy to find. Obviously, Shield and Magic Missile we get anyway. Misty Step we can get from items as well as from a scroll, but the scroll for Misty Step is really common, so you'll find that anyway. Blink we can get from a piece of equipment. Banishment is the only one that we're kind of forced to get from a scroll, but you can definitely still get it. And Artistry of War is a guaranteed scroll find anyway, so the only one that's a bit iffy is Banishment. The rest are all really easy to get. So yeah, let's get into the equipment. So we're going to be treading some familiar ground here with some of these, but honestly, it will make sense as we go through it. Just going to unequip that. First up, our weapon of choice is Fala Aluv. I know, this is just the Dancer of Elistra in disguise. Leave me alone, okay? But Fala Aluv is going to be a great weapon for us. It's finesse, meaning it's going to use our dexterity. It's the closest thing we can get to the giant fuck-off greatsword that she does use. I mean, sometimes it's a greatsword, sometimes it's like a lightsaber type thing. Sometimes it is just a longsword. I don't really know. The soul sword comes in a lot of different forms, so we're just going to stick with Fala Aluv. Fala Aluv Melody is going to be a great buff for us. We can pick up the sword right away in Act 1, and because of the way the sword works, it's going to synergize amazingly with things like Magic Missile, because with the Shriek variant, adding an extra 1d4 of thunder damage to any attack within the radius around us, Magic Missile hitting multiple times is going to apply that extra damage every time. So that means Magic Missile is technically doing, well, it's doing a lot more damage. It's doing 4d4 plus 3 damage with every attack, which is a lot, and a high level caster Magic Missile is really going to take advantage of that. Also, the Sing variant can give us and our allies a buff with saving throws, so that can be really, really nice as well. Obviously, this is a +1 weapon usually, so buffing this thing up with the Drakethroat Glaive, maybe to give it some fire damage to really get that kind of demonic feeling to it would absolutely work, but I didn't need that for my testing. This weapon still worked out amazingly regardless, thanks to the extra damage being piled on from things like Banishing Smite, which you can see here, does a lot of damage, and the Sword Flourishes, which still do a lot of damage. And again, maybe there's even room for Great Weapon Master in this build if you know how to finagle the stats pretty much perfectly, so feel free to work off of that to the best of your ability. Otherwise, another weapon option that you can pick up a bit later would be the Infernal Rapier. The Infernal Rapier would give you a +1 bonus to spell save DC, and instead of your dexterity modifier, it would use your spellcasting ability modifier for the attack rolls. I believe this also works with the damage rolls, but it just says attack rolls in this. I could be wrong. So if you decide you don't want to focus so much on dexterity and instead want to do some other stuff with the stats, you could go for this. It's another kind of infernal weapon, so it kind of fits the whole limbo theme, and it yet lets you summon a Cambion as well, meaning that you kind of get another summon from Limbo too. So I think it does work out quite nicely, but I do think Fala Aluv is the more fitting weapon for this build overall. I do think the Infernal Rapier is a nice alternative option as well. Let's get into the equipment. First up, of course, we have the Helmet of Arcane Acuity to give us Arcane Acuity, which buffs our spellcasting save DC with every time we hit with a weapon attack. Perfect for a Spellblade build. Basically, the more attacks we do, the more likely all of our spell effects are going to go off. This is not required for this build, but it definitely helps, especially into the later acts, where enemy saving throws are going to be really, really high. So I do think this can work out quite nicely for you, but this does have room to be swapped out. Maybe the Birthright for more charisma. Maybe if you don't want to use the Gloves of Dexterity, you can put the Warped Headband of Intellect here instead. You'd have a little bit less intelligence spell save DC overall, but it can still work. Maybe you could replace it with the Elixir of Arcane Acuity instead if you don't mind the alchemy system in this game. There is room to play around with this if you feel like you could come up with something a bit more optimized, but for as a blanket option that's going to work for most people, the Helmet of Arcane Acuity is going to do the job. Next up for the Cloak, it doesn't really matter what you put in this slot, I just quite like the Cloak of Displacement, giving enemies advantage on attack rolls against you until you are hit, and it replenishes at the start of every round. Again, maybe this could be flavored as like being in and out of limbo at any given time. You're only half in the material plane, and as such, some attacks just kind of go right through you, but it's kind of chaotic and random. Could be fun. It's just a solid option overall, but again, something like the Cloak of Protection could also work if you just want more AC. We're in camp clothing with this build anyway, so it doesn't really matter what you choose. Next up, the Elegant Studded Leather. This is going to give us a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, advantage on stealth checks, which can work great with greater invisibility, as well as a usage of shield once per short rest. So now we don't even need spell slots to trigger shield. We get it once per short rest, and sometimes that's all you need. The Elegant Studded Leather is also going to work greatly with our dexterity, so feel free to use that basically just to use this armor to your advantage as much as you can. Otherwise, in the early game, you could pick up something like the 1T Scale Mail, which also adds your full dexterity modifier to your armor class, gives you that buff to initiative rolls as well, and doesn't impose disadvantage on stealth checks. A decent, solid, kind of mid-game armor to kind of work off until you get the elegant studded leather. Or if you want to stick with the medium armor route, grab something like the Armor of Agility, which would give you even more AC, but I did feel like the elegant studded leather did work a bit more in our favor as far as, you know, making this build exactly what I wanted it to be. Next up, the Gloves of Dexterity, as you already know, sets our dexterity score to 18 and gives us a +1 to attack rolls. One of the best armor pieces in the game for weird builds like this. And finally, the Hell Dusk Boots. You cannot be forcibly moved by foes, spells, or actions, and you ignore the effects of difficult terrain. Pretty good. And whenever you fail a saving throw, once per long rest, you can use your reaction to just succeed it instead. We also gain access to Hell Crawler, where you can teleport to an area and deal additional fire damage where you land, once per short rest. So it's like Misty Step, but with a demonic flair to it, which just makes sense for a build like this. But of course, that's a late game thing, so in the early game, pick up the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, giving you a usage of Misty Step once per short rest, and makes it so you cannot be enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and cannot slip on grease or ice. Overall, all of this equipment just fuels the abilities that we already have, and just gives us a little bit more on top. It all just fits the theme. They're fairly standard pieces of equipment on their own, but together they do kind of fit this unique playstyle that we're going for. Next up, for the amulet here, we do have a few options here. The one I decided to use in my testing and the one that I found worked the nicest was Psychic Spark. Since Magic Missile is going to be a huge part of our offensive playstyle, this gives us an additional dart whenever we cast it, so it just means more flat damage, and it's an early game item as well. You could also go for the Amulet of Misty Step, which gives you another usage of Misty Step once per short rest. If you're really having trouble finding that scroll, between this and the Disintegrating Nightwalkers, we are going to get 2 Misty Steps per short rest, which is pretty much all you should need, and these don't cost spell slots either, so you may feel like you prefer these. And for a full spellcaster like this, I always recommend keeping the Spellcrux Amulet on hand anyway, which will let you once per long rest as a bonus action restore any level of spell slot, effectively giving us 2 level 6 spell slots, which we can use to fuel our big attacks, which is absolutely great. And again, if you're packing those level 6 spell slots, for level 6 spells, I should say, from the scroll, like Arcane Gate or Globe of Invulnerability, you're going to get to use those more than once per long rest, which is really, really nice. So I always recommend having this on hand, and once you use the effect, you can just swap it out for the other 2 amulets and get their effects instead. As for the actual look of this character, we've got Camp Clothing here. The Camp Clothing in question is the black flare leather outfit mixed with the camp boots from the Citizens Camp Clothing mod, which is and both of those are available. I believe this is a base game Camp Clothing, but this is a mod, and that mod is available in the in-game mod manager, so if you have access to that, whether you're watching this now in September or later in October, you should just be able to get that right away. And this armor has been dyed, I believe, in the Hades dye, which comes from the dye, one of the popular dye mods. I'm forgetting the exact name, and I apologize. That comes from the in-game mod manager as well. So all of that is on the up and up. And there you go, that is the build. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this one. The only thing that I know is basically just down to, just down to everybody's personal playthrough is the whole scroll deal. It does add a fun side quest that incentivizes exploring every nook and cranny in the game to make sure you get those spells in order to complete this playstyle. But at the end of the day, all the important stuff that you need is baked into the basic subclass and the equipment as well, which I forgot to mention the rings here. We just got the Ring of Arcane Synergy so that whenever we cast a cantrip, we can do more damage with our melee attacks, and the Ring of Blink to give us a usage of Blink once per long rest. There you go. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. It's there. And as always, all stuff is in the description anyway. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff here that I think all works really well for this build. Like I say, it's got a fun playstyle that will work throughout the whole game. Playing a bard is always tons of fun. Adding in that spell scroll stuff is just a nice extra touch. It's like a nice side quest. And again, once you get all of these scrolls, it's going to feel really good. The playstyle fits in really nicely. You get the big Banishing Smite. It's like a final attack at the final level of the build. You gain tons of battlefield control and teleportation. It's just a ton of fun. My playtesting with this build was honestly really, really fun. I tested it at a few different levels of play, and obviously with a build like this, it's a bit awkward testing because it's realistically, what spell scrolls would you have been likely to pick up at this point? So I kind of just let myself test with the spell slot level that we had, and it worked out really, really nicely. And again, with the early game equipment too, you are supplementing maybe the lack of Misty Step. So I do find that the spell scroll restriction is not a huge deal on this particular build. And I do think it adds a nice extra element to the gameplay if you decide to go down this route. Otherwise, just, do what I do. when I make these videos and just cheat the scrolls in. I mean, who's going to stop you? Larian's clearly endorsing it, so, you know. But yeah, no, this was a really fun build request. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one because I absolutely loved making it. I'm down to do more build requests now that I'm kind of getting back into the swing of things, and I do hope to get the deity build series like kind of concluded soon as well. I'm just very busy at the moment. But anyways, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.